To shade the diamond, I will add a new material slot and call it diamond. Then I will set a red color for the viewport. Then I will go into edit mode onto my hammer, select the diamond, pressing L and assign it. When I exit edit mode, I can see that the material is applied because the diamond get this reddish color into the viewport. I will enter rendering mode and I will start working on the shading. I will start with a faked absorption shader. So we'll need two inputs. One is a light path, the other is geometry, and we will multiply those two. So I will add an input geometry, then light path. So here little mistake, I've chosen geometry again. I will add a converter math node, set it to multiply, plug in the back facing. Then I will get rid of this, add an input light path, and branch the ray length into the multiply node. Then I will duplicate the multiply node and set it just after geometry. The ray length node will give us a distance. And when we multiply it with the back facing, it will give Blender a distance between the first contact with the object and the distance between this contact surface and the back facing surface. So currently it will give us a depth information of the object we are shading, and we can use this depth information to drive a pair of color that we'll be using on translucent and glass material. So I'm setting a bright red and a dark red into a mix RGB and use our previous nodes as a factor. I will then add a shader translucent BSDF and plug the color into our translucent BSDF. And you can see that I get light edges, and whenever the diamond is getting thicker, it gets darker. And this is because we are mixing those two colors using the depth information, and the thicker is the object, the darker will be the color of the translucent. So it won't scatter as much light as with a bright color. And we can set the absorption level playing with the multiply node. I will add a glass BSDF and plug in my mixed colors. I will then organize a bit my shaders, so I will frame all of our absorption node setup, and then I will make a copy of it and call it absorption 2, because I believe we won't be using the same factor for both the translucent and the glass BSDF. And it's hard to see the absorption result on the glass shader and on the diamond because the belt is occluding the back face. I will then use a shader add shader and plug in my translucent and glass BSDF into it. I will then add a mix shader just before the translucent, as we did for the glossiness of the eye. This will allow me to play with the factor of translucency added onto the glass BSDF by playing with this mix shader. To control the position of this translucent boost, I will add a gradient texture and set it to radial. Then, with this node selected, I will press Ctrl T to bring in the mapping node. I will Ctrl Shift click it to see the result, and I will play with the mapping value so that I get a nice and centered radial gradient. I will then add the color ramp to be able to tweak it. And my goal here is to highlight the very center of the diamond. In the mapping node, I will then increase all the scale level to 4. Please note that by default, the coordinates were set to generated, which is fine. This will help me to get a more focused effect, and then I can play with my color ramp to increase this contrast and have a very well defined center of the diamond. I can now use this value to drive the mix factor of the translucent shader. So I will plug this in, then I will give me some space, and I will load our normal map. Before I will slightly increase the lightness of the dark red color in the glossy BSDF absorption node 3. I can now load my normal map, set the texture to non-color data, then add a vector normal map and plug this into our glass BSDF normals. Then I will organize a bit everything. So I will frame some of the node groups to make them cleaner. And on top of this, I want to add some glossiness. So I will add a shader glossy with a very, very low roughness of 0.0001. And then I will add an add shader and a mix shader. So first add shader, plug this in, put a mix shader in between to be able to control the glossiness added. And I will drive this with a layer weight and a color ramp to add some Fresnel effect. So I revised my roughness to 0.001, and this is because whenever you're using a value of 0 for the roughness, Blender will render a bit slower and it will turn a bit more noisy. So adding this very, very little value of roughness will be enough for Blender to, I don't know why, but calculate the glossiness a little betterly. So now I can define my facing using a B-spline color ramp. I've plugged before my normal map into it. I will then use it to drive a mix value node that will be plugged into our mix shader. So I will set a high value of 1 and a low value of 0.2, I believe. And then I will turn around a bit my diamond to see how this shader behaves, because as it involves translucency and transparency, I need to check it in different angles to see the HDR shining through. I will revise my highest value of glossiness to 0.5. I can now organize a bit my shaders. And then I will enter edit mode. I will select the diamond mesh and I will duplicate it. And then I will scale it so that it's bounded to the largest diamond and it's included in it. So this is a little trick I've taken from Gleb Alexandrov from Creative Shrimp, and whenever he creates translucent and transparent material, he oftenly duplicates the mesh and insert it into the existing one. And the goal here is to create bounces of light and stuff like this happening into the mesh and give some more interest and more weirdness to our object. I will then repeat the process for the eyes of the dragon head that is on the shoulder plate. So this time I will make a copy of this shader because I want to remove the gradient texture we've been using. because as those elements are not centered toward the center of geometry or the origin point of our mesh, setting correctly the gradient texture will be really complicated. And also this area is pretty occluded, so we lost a bit of accuracy, but as we won't be seeing this that much and as it won't be that much exposed to light, that's not that important. Then I will mostly revise the glossiness factor by reducing it, because with a value of 0.5 and 0.1, as it is added upon our shader, it might be too bright. So just double check the values on the video or also on the source file for both the belt diamond and those eyes diamond. Another super important thing, to make this work, we absolutely need the mesh to be closed so that Blender can calculate back facing. So I will select the eyes, extrude and scale down the outer edges and fill the gap with Ctrl F grid fill. So in the end, my mix value for the glossiness will be set to 0.3 and 0.1. And then I will just make some tests by rotating our HDR using our HDR orientation empty. And I will also modify the translucent shader color with a more orangey touch so that it's more interesting. It gives some color variation to our diamond with some fire look, which is interesting for this dragon stuff character.